every fragment of information that reaches us through Starlink bring another horrifying story, another glimpse into a reality that the regime desperately tries to hide. And remember, this is a nation that is fighting for its own liberation from a brutal regime that can no longer protect its own citizens and has completely lost its legitimacy. It's a mass atrocity and it's unfolding in real time. The executive network that we have, the global community of Iranian CEOs, the operators, the engineers, the financiers, the founders, these are capital ready. Yep. These are execution capable resources. And these are emotionally invested assets. And that's how Iranaissance was born, by experts who want to give back. A decentralized, voluntary, capacity-driven platform designed to prepare Iran for a credible transition and reconstruction. It was emerged by professionals who succeeded abroad and now want to give back.
Welcome to Hunter's War, a podcast about the intersection of geopolitics, war, and society. Today, we're going to talk about Iran, about the protests that we're seeing on the streets, the brutal crackdown by the regime, the incredible death toll, but also the vision that Iranians have for what comes next. Today's conversation is with Bardia Hariri, an Iranian-American businessman, academic, and visionary for the future of Iran. While people have been predicting the fall of the regime for decades, what we see here is a vision around what comes next. I think an important one focused on the economics, trade, finance, the people, the redevelopment. In all of the death and darkness that we're seeing, it's important to make sure that we are preparing for the day after. Often lost in the news is the reality of what it takes to get a country going after conflict, to tie a society together and to redevelop. So I think it's important to hear the vision that is told and to hopefully see what could potentially come next after the regime falls. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Bardia, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for your platform. And thank you for being the voice for the voiceless and for echoing the truth when it is inconvenient.
I hope the voice that we're hearing is yours. I think it's an important one at the moment. And speaking to the protests that we're seeing, the news is often not clear. There's not a lot of information. I would like to hear from you what you are hearing of the current situation. And then maybe also on that, what is different about this time? Because the Iranian people are no stranger to protest, risking their lives for a demonstration about a need for change. But what do you see today and what is potentially different from what we've seen in the past?
Sure. Thank you. Right now, Iran is in an ongoing war between the people and the regime. And it is important to repeat this sentence over and over because the regime's propaganda machine falsely frames this as a war between Iran and Israel or the United States. So I want to confirm that this is a war between the people and the regime. And this didn't happen overnight. This is the result of 47 years of systematic failures and repressions. The Islamic Republic in Iran has failed to provide the most basic livelihood rights. We are facing a triple-digit inflation. Just to give you context, the inflation in the U.S. is about 2.5%, 3%. We're talking about triple-digit inflation. We're talking about widespread poverty. We're talking about deep corruption. Families cannot afford food, housing, medicine. There is no freedom of a speech, no freedom to protest, no freedom to choose one's future. And any peaceful act of protest is met with suppression, with imprisonment, with torture, with execution, and corruption is institutionalized. The ordinary people are stripped of dignity and opportunity, and corruption is institutionalized. And these failures fueled repeated uprising over the years. It was not the first time. It's been happening over and over. But this is the first time that caused even the long-time regime loyalists, the insiders, the veterans, the former officials to openly question the legitimacy of the system. So I have to say that this movement represents a total collapse of trust between the state and the society. A couple of days ago, the regime has massacred its own citizens and pushed the country into total darkness by shutting down the internet for weeks. At least 33,000 people were killed in just 3 days. And
33,000.
33,000 in 3 days. And some legal experts compare this to genocide. And let me give you some context. This is more than 10 times the number of lives lost in September 11, compressed into 72 hours by a government against its own people. Now, the internet was shut down for weeks. Millions of us outside Iran have not been able to really talk to our parents, to our loved ones. I only knew through my friends and family that my parents are alive, but I have no idea, under what condition, right? And whenever we get these small signals, thanks to Starlink, we begin to grasp the depth of this brutality. We see videos of parents searching for their children, for their loved ones among piles of dead bodies. We hear accounts of morgues holding bodies hostage in exchange for hush money.
Oh, wow.
We hear children who have lost both parents, minors lost both parents because they just went out to chant against the government, right? To ask for the freedom, And we hear of injured citizens who are unable to have bullets removed from their bodies out of fear that they will be detained or killed if they go to state-controlled hospitals. Or we hear detainees who were injected with toxic substances and then released and then died days after. And these are the victims of overcrowded prisons and deliberate abuse, right? We are witnessing medical doctors being taken and detained for weeks simply for treating injured protesters. Their loved ones in total darkness about their fate. Every fragment of information that reaches us through Starlink brings with another horrifying story, another glimpse into a reality that the regime desperately tries to hide. And remember, this is a nation that is fighting for its own liberation from a brutal regime that can no longer protect its own citizens and has completely lost its legitimacy. Let me be clear that this is not a foreign conflict. It's a mass atrocity, and it's unfolding in real time. And the world's response will define what comes next.
And how do you see the world's response? Because I think even what you're saying here, it's not getting out. It's not there is news, there's coverage, but I do not believe the true level of atrocity is getting out. What are you seeing happening either from regional countries or the US or Europe that is different and new? Because again, there has been protests, there's been violence. The regime has tried to hold down its people for decades. What are we seeing that is signaling change?
Very good question. Let me give you a little bit context before I respond directly. This is a regime that 47 years has openly chanted death to America, threatened United States leaders, promoted anti-Semitism, spread disinformation, supported terrorism, and actively destabilized the region. And today, the same regime is trying to buy time by initiating yet another round of negotiations. Exactly the same tactic it used for decades, while simultaneously killing its own citizens at a scale comparable to genocides. Any negotiation with an illegitimate regime that is massacring its own citizens sends a dangerous global message. Literally, it says that any dictator can remain in power simply by killing enough civilians. Now, to answer to your question, Hunter, what we are witnessing now is a massive defection. Former regime loyalists no longer believe in its legitimacy. When a government cannot provide the basic rights and instead wages war against its own population, it literally forfeits any claim to legitimacy under international norms. And decades of sanctions didn't change the behavior of this regime neither. They produced a sanctions economy, literally a sanctions economy. Imagine a small circle of oligarchs profited by selling discounted oil to China through shadow networks, often using their children's or relatives' foreign passports, and the money never returned to Iran. The money never repatriated back to the land. It was extracted, it was laundered, and it was parked abroad. And when a country is cut off from global technology, It's cut off from capital markets. It's cut off from talent while suffering massive brain drain. Its system inevitably collapsed. And that is why we are seeing power outages, we are seeing water shortages, we are seeing failing grids, we are seeing institutional decays across every sector. And this crisis is not a result of foreign pressure alone. It is the product of absolute corruption, absolute chronic mismanagement, absolute failed isolationist narrative that has hollowed the state from within. Think about it. A regime that survives by selling its country cheaply abroad and ruling through fear at home has already lost its legitimacy. And under both history and international law, such regimes do not survive. They collapse, right? So that should be the master narrative here. Do not negotiate with this regime.
I 100% agree that this is not a foreign conflict, but the regime tries to use that story. It tries to portray any involvement or pressure from regional actors or the U.S. as something that is causing protests. I look at some of the U.S. president's recent statements threatening the regime in relation to the protesters. And while I think it is the right thing to say, as you said, to a regime that has lost legitimacy, is it not dangerous to then give fuel to that narrative of foreign involvement rather than figuring out how to pressure and allow a regime to collapse in on itself because it is rotten from the inside, as you described?
Yeah, it is true. It's a multidimensional factor. A series of things has to happen, right? Maximum pressure, maximum support for the people, while enabling maximum defection, while avoiding negotiation with the regime officials because the regime lost its legitimacy, and at the same time enabling the converged political and social and economical elites who are now trying to get together to give that alternative which is democratic, that alternative which is pluralistic, and wants to give the power back to the people. And with that, I want to give a little bit of context of what is happening actually right now, because at the end of the day, nothing is good or bad until you evaluate against the alternative. And we have to see what is that alternative. If we get rid of the cancer, what else comes in, right? And I want to talk a little bit about Iranaissance, and I want to talk a little bit about the opposition, and I want to talk about the alternatives, and I want to talk about the elites inside Iran, the mid-level managers, the youths, the women, the most underutilized assets, because we need to not just focus on the pain, we have to also talk about the solution. And that's something that we really demand from the political parties from outside of Iran, that, hey, look, we have talked enough about the problem. Let's create the alternative solution. Just like what your narrative in your podcast is, we have to create our own destiny, right? We can't just can get consumed by the pains. Let me talk a little bit about the Iranaissance. Iranaissance was born with a segment of nearly 8 million Iranians living in the diaspora over 6-7 different waves of immigration over the past 40 plus years. Iranaissance was born within this segment, and particularly among those who left Iran more than 30 years ago. They built their lives, they built their careers abroad, and now they feel they have a deep responsibility to give back. I don't know whether you were following the massive Gina revolution 3 years ago. That was the turning point. It shook Iranians around the world out of complacency. And I want to use the word complacency. It wasn't only a grief or anger, Hunter. It was clarity. It was a shared realization that history was calling and that silence was no longer an option. That's why I use the word complacency. Across cities and continents, many of us began asking the same question. What can we actually do? None of us were into politics, but politics got into us, right? It was not about the slogans. It was not about social media outrage. It was real. It was tangible contribution. We had some soul searching. We took stock of what we already had. We had our network. We had our professional skills. We had our resources. We had access to institutions. We had access to capital. We had access to expertise built from scratch over decades in abroad, and decided to organize them with intention and purpose, because enough was enough. And that's how Iranaissance was born, by experts who want to give back. A decentralized, voluntary capacity-driven platform designed to prepare Iran for a credible transition and reconstruction. It was emerged by professionals who succeeded abroad and now want to give back. Imagine CEOs, executives, business leaders, academics, economists, engineers, lawyers, technologists, psychologists, sociologists, both inside and outside of Iran, to think seriously about Iran's future, to get out of the complacency, because complacency is a disease. We can keep talking about the pain and the atrocity of this regime, but to think seriously about Iran's future, that started a few years ago, to think about economic reconstruction, to think about reintegration into global economy, to restore dignity after decades of destruction and isolation, to counter the regime's narrative, basically. Because the regime's common narrative was, hey, if we go, the country will be, separatists will come and then the whole country will fail and all that. But that's not the reality. We are human. We are in charge of our own destiny, right? Yeah. So after months and months of quiet networking and trust building across, diverse communities, Iranaissance actually convened its first major conference in February 2025, exactly a year ago, at the Plug and Play Technology Center in Silicon Valley, California. That's the hub of all the startups in the world, right? So, and we brought about 40 experts, many with direct experience in reconstruction efforts in places like Balkans, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, South Africa. They all came together with one sober question. What are the conditions required for Iran's economic reconstruction? And the message that emerged was very clear. It was deliberately clear and disciplined that Iran's reconstruction is possible. All we did was showcasing real success stories, comparative case studies, demonstrating how compliance with only 5 non-negotiable conditions would enable reconstruction, just like the way that it did in other places. And sustain the foreign direct investors to rebuild this country. Because at the end of the day, Hunter, we need about $150 billion a year for the first 5 years, and the same amount, $150 billion a year for the second 5 years to rebuild this country, right? And it's so simple. Sometimes we get so consumed by the problem, we forget about the solution. We have to focus on the solution. The solution is so simple. Just 5 key conditions would be able to give the assurance to foreign direct investors and foreign institutional investors to come and invest and remain there, right? And spread the money, bring peace and prosperity to Iran and the community and the region and the world. And those are very simple solutions. One is MIGA, Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, which basically is an insurance given to the foreign investors that, hey, your money will be repatriated if you want it. You can take your money back whenever you want, right? One is IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standard, which is about transparency of accounting, right? One is FATF, which means Financial Action Task Force, which means your money won't be invested towards terrorism. It's transparent. You know where your dollar is going, right? One is ILO, International Labor Organization. There won't be any child labor. There will be equal employment opportunity, etc. And last but not the least, neutral arbitration and dispute resolution, which is basically giving the insurance of rule of law, basically to ensure rule of law and neutrality and transparency and accountability to protect investors, employees, employers, etc., their rights. So just compliance with those 5 by the parliament, because it's about the rule, about the system that is by the people, for the people, right? If the parliament in Iran complies these 5, and now think about the advantages of this country and the potentials of this country. I have lived at least in 7 different countries, and I have never seen a country like this with these potentials. Think about it. We have a country with over 50 million people under the age of 40. 50 million people under the age of 40. More than 20 million university graduates. The human capital in this country is the most underutilized asset. Deeply educated, they're resilient. They have seen it all, right? They're resilient, right? They're entrepreneurial. They're particularly strong in engineering, in science, in medicine, in applied technology. Now, Hunter, imagine the map. Think about the geography of this country. It sits at the strategic crossroad connecting Europe, Asia, Middle East, Central Asia, South Asia. No realistic east-west or north-south trade architecture can bypass Iran in the long term. And now imagine if you have special economic zones in 4 corners of this vast country to offer tax incentives for foreign direct investors, ports, etc. Now think about the natural resources. That's mind-blowing. The surplus is striking. Think about it. Iran represents roughly 1% of the world's population, literally 1% of the world's population, and 1% of land mass, only 1% of land mass, 1% of the world's population, yet holds over 13% of global oil reserves, around 17% of global gas reserves, about 7% of world's mineral wealth, alongside world-class potential in renewable energy. We have the best winds, we have the best sun. Honestly, God has given us more than our share. The problem is management, the problem is care, the problem is love and affection for our people, right? So, and let's remind ourselves, because of these sanctions over 40 plus years, we have no international debt, which makes it so easy for creating the fiscal space for structural reform, for infrastructural investment, for public-private partnerships, for foreign direct investments. And let's not forget, Hunter, that there is 8 million people outside of the country. The executive network that we have, the global community of Iranian CEOs, the operators, the engineers, the financiers, the founders, these are capital ready. Yep. These are execution capable resources. And these are emotionally invested assets. Mm-hmm. They are not seeking power or office. They already have it here.
Yep.
Their hearts are with Iran, not with titles, not with positions, but with rebuilding their motherland, the land that they remember when they think of their parents' and grandparents' house. And that is the vision behind Iranaissance. That's the solution we have to think about the future. What is possible? Let's stop talking about the problems, pains, etc. Because if there is no alternative that we create, then there is no alternative. Then again, we follow the regime's narrative. So that's why we have to, quietly and seriously and responsibly prepare the foundation for Iran, for the future of Iran that is stable, and Iran which is stable, which is prosperous, which is connected, which is friend with the rest of the world. Yeah. No more depth to this or that. It's friend with the rest of the world because it's going to be part of this global value chain, right?
Well, and I think that is an incredibly wonderful vision and optimistic and clear, in the sense that you talk about the need for a financial environment that is trusting, that is open. You talk about having the capital that is ready. You talk about the resources that are there. I was going to ask about the people, but you mentioned the people that are ready from the diaspora. I think a challenge, and maybe you can address that a little bit, is that the brain drain has really affected those obviously who have left, but also those who have stayed, and their ability to have maybe in a transition to jump into some of that. Let's imagine there is change. How do you see that happening from a people level? Is there, as you mentioned, enough engineers and financiers to be able to kind of transition and are waiting for change? Or is there going to be a period of almost diaspora-driven management of things? I'm thinking about the actual nitty-gritty details of how something like this could happen, because it is massive.
Yep. Let's to clarify and simplify things, let's categorize it into current atrocity, current chaos, stability, which within 60 days we have to ensure stability after the regime collapses, right? And then reconstruction, right? Let's talk about now. Millions of people went to the streets with a clear message to topple this regime. That's the demand. They know what they don't want, and they ask for one name to help facilitate creation of a system that brings back their dignity, their freedom, and security. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the late Shah, has voluntarily stepped forward, not to rule, but to help lead a peaceful transition and facilitate a democratic, pluralistic system of governance by the people, for the people, through fair, free, inclusive, and transparent election, right? So millions inside, including former regime loyalists, left, right, ethnic communities, conservatives, civil servants, are now converging around this demand for dignity, this demand for freedom, this demand for self-determination, right? So all we need to do is now to make sure that the mid-level managers, right, they are empowered, right, to ensure smooth transition within the first 60 days. Bills are paid, ATM machines have enough liquidity, transportations are there, the grains are there, right? The energy is there, people are fed, right? And then a free, fair election to make sure that
Hmm.
people can cast their votes, right? Whatever the outcome is up to people. And then we have the parliament, right, which is by their true representatives to come and comply with all those 5 conditions, especially economic zone improvement, development, and all those things, right, to attract foreign investors, etc. Now, when the borders are open, when we can communicate, when we can send money, when we can receive money, when we can invest, when we can go back and forth, then there's no difference. I mean, many of these executives in diaspora, they have their offshoring and outsourcing in other countries. I personally have offices in Pakistan. I have offices in Philippines. I would love
Hmm.
to expand to Iran. I
Yeah.
believe in Iranian engineers being smart, being resilient. Of course, why should I do business with other countries only? I can definitely open up my office there, right? So
Yeah.
creating jobs, as long as we can comply with those 5 compliance key elements is a no-brainer, right?
But it highlights as well, I think I'm curious about the transition culturally for society, because I think what you're saying, which is true, is there are Iranians ready for when change happens. There are Iranians capable, have the wealth, have the vision, but those who have not left, who have been subject to a regime for decades, and there's an understandable need for a transition period. How do you see that happening? Because this is a vision that I think is great, but how do we get people to see it as well?
One thing that is shocking for many people who are not Iranians is the level of acculturation, means cultural adaptation to global
Hmm.
consumerism of Iranians inside Iran. If you randomly call a Gen Z in Iran right now and just drop one sentence from this Friends or Two and a Half Men series, they can
Yeah.
tell you the rest of it. They're connected. They get the same joke. If you talk about Sheldon Cooper, they know who Sheldon Cooper is, right? They're connected. They are acculturated to global consumerism. And that's why they know what is it that they don't want, and they know what is it that they want. That's not a concern. We have access to hundreds and hundreds of startups inside Iran. Sometimes I just ask myself, oh my goodness, if these brilliant kids were in Silicon Valley, and let me remind you, most of these executives in Silicon Valley, they came from Iran, by the way, right? So integration to global value chain is not a problem. As long as we can have that smooth transition within the first 60 days to make sure people at least they don't die out of hunger, because this regime is a dirty
Yeah.
regime. You can kill its own people and they can kill its own infrastructure and say that it was America or Israel. They can do that
Yeah.
easily. So as long as we can power through the first 60 days and then have that free and fair election and comply with those 5, the rest is Adam Smith's invisible hands. It's mechanical. We don't need to micromanage it. That's the whole purpose. They're ready. They're ready.
They're ready, but then also, and again, not trying to find the challenges, but I'm thinking we are entering globally a moment where things like free trade and diplomacy are being challenged. There's a world order that is shifting, and where Iran has a history of being as you mentioned, on the crossroads of trade, incredibly well connected, whether it's to the U.S. in the 60s and 70s. It is has a history of being connected to the wider region in the world. At the same time, if we had a transition, if things start to go well, if there is the reconstruction, Iran, the new Iran, is entering a moment where it has some powers around it, whether it be China or Russia or the U.S., that are not always looking to keep stability or could be trying to look for a pawn. Iran would need to almost choose a partner. Is it focused more on India for trade? Is it continuing China? So the geopolitical impacts that could squash a incredibly wonderful transition of a people who are looking for a more optimistic future worries me. So am I overblowing the geopolitical side, or how do you see that?
Let me give you an example. And then I talk about China and Russia. In America, when you want to buy a Mercedes, each part of it is built in one country and is assembled in Alabama. It's no longer about, I have a product I want to import or export. is about being
Mhm.
part of this global value chain. Each piece of this car is built in one country. And that's GVC, global value chain. And Iran, because of its own geopolitical advantages, because of the special economic zone opportunities, because of
Mhm.
its most underutilized assets, which is its untapped human capital, definitely can be part of that GVC, global value chain. That's one thing. So definitely is a win-win for everywhere. All those pharmaceuticals, all those tech centers, all they can have their own innovation pipelines, etc., and take the mutually beneficial opportunities, right? And transfer and transplant innovation across the world. So that's win-win for everybody, right? The second part, what's in it for Russia? What's in it for China? Let's face it, if we have a transparent and credible and accountable and neutral Iran, then their credibility will boost as well. Right
Mm.
now, their credibility is down because basically we are money laundering. I mean, not we, I mean, the Islamic Republic is money laundering with China, right? They're selling discounted oil to
Yeah.
them through all these shadow companies and all that. It has damaged their reputation. Now, if we have a transparent, neutral, and accountable Iran, we will have better deals with China. They can have some tax-free operation, in the special economic zones. It's win-win,
Yeah.
everybody will win here. We can always renegotiate all of it. The whole point here is to integrate into global value chain and be friend
Mhm.
with everybody. Everybody will win. There is enough meat here. There is enough pie here. The pie is so big. Everybody will
Mhm.
eat.
Yeah. And maybe with that too, because I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, but you have a PhD around the integration of states into the consumer economies. Tell me about how that has shaped your vision for the future of Iran. And then if you don't mind, I'd love for you to tell a little bit about yourself as well, going backwards maybe from that PhD, because your story begins in Iran.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Actually, my PhD, the title of my PhD, which was 13 years ago, was Acculturation to Global Consumer Culture. I wanted to understand what it takes for Iran to integrate global value chain culturally. And after 3 or 4 years, I realized not that I wasted 3 years of my life. I realized that they are culturally integrated. So I tried to
Hmm.
understand what it takes, and then I realized that they are culturally integrated. It's a matter of the time, right? So we had to make sure that all the pieces of puzzle are there, so that people get to that maturity, both from diaspora, inside, outside, political parties, civil society. Everybody had to get to that realization because we all suffered, 47 years. Everybody from any shades of life you came from, left, right, ethnic, we all suffered by this regime. And we went through massive amounts of traumas over the years, war and abuses, all that. We had
Hmm.
to go through that maturity level to realize, okay, enough is enough, right? So now you ask about myself. I always had this passion about Iran. I was raised in a family that in my grandmother's house, I had grandparents' pictures with different, dignitaries, the king, the governors, and all that. So I always had this mentality that, okay, I have to give back,
Hmm.
right? It's all about giving back, regardless of who is in power. We have to take care of Iran. 4 generation of mine, they all gave back, regardless who was in power, right? Because I see myself as a doctor that I have to take care of my patient, regardless of what's going
Hmm.
on right now, right? Iran is in dire pain right now. We have to give back. We cannot wait until this regime goes. This regime won't go unless we create that alternative, right? That alternative, which is pluralistic, which is democratic, which is in favor of people, and it is creating a system by the people for the people, right? So what I do for a living, I'm a businessman. I have a few businesses. I'm in financial services. I'm also involved with community building, helping the Farsi-speaking community have a smooth transition and integration in their post-migration experience in California, from Afghan community, from Tajik community, from Iranian community. And over the past 3 years, I woke up to give back within my own means, within my own power, right? To help converge different shades of political spectrums, to help bring together different, experts to come and showcase what is possible for Iran. And most importantly, to connect them to the real end users which are living in Iran. We have the best capable mid-level managers. I'm not going to manage anything inside Iran. Diaspora is not going to manage anything inside Iran. Those are the capable women, youngs, LGBTQ, youths. These are the engineers. These are the capable resources that they are going to manage. So our job in diaspora has been to create that bridge, being their voice, creating that opportunity for them. We don't want to look from up to down. They know better than many of us, to be very frank with you. Is being their voice, making sure that we give making sure that we give the knowledge to counter their regime's narratives, and making sure that we educate the political leaders outside of Iran that, hey, look, do not negotiate with this illegitimate regime, and stay persistent and continuously give back, right? That's all we can do, right? And thanks to you and your platform, we can convey the truth and counter the regime's wrong and ill-advised narratives.
And what is next for Iranaissance as a platform? Because that is just one of the many ways in which you are both getting the message out, but also planning and preparing.
You know, we are in the middle of a battle of narratives, right? So first of all is to make sure that we can convey the right message through different platforms, right? To be the voice of voiceless. Second part, which is very important, is to identify the who is who and make sure that we are ready to mobilize resources when the time comes, when day zero happens. Because I personally put myself into Donald Trump's shoes. You know, he is a businessman. He doesn't want to see a failed state. And at the end of the day, he wants to know what's in it for him and for America at the end of the day. So we need to make sure that that assurance is given. That assurance is given that, okay, Iran is not going to be a failed state. People will not die out of hunger the first 60 days. And through all those special economic zones and all those GVC integration, etc., it will be a win-win for the region. It will be a win-win for America and American citizens. Because at the end of the day, I'm an American, so I want to make sure that it will benefit America as well as Iran and region and the world, right? Given that assurance requires plan, requires personal, which is very difficult because you cannot directly talk to everybody. And you have to, at the same time, realize that many people who are right now mid-level managers, deputy ministers, etc., these are the people who are going to actually lead the transition and support the reconstruction. It's supposed to be a smooth transition. You can't expect everybody to leave, right? These are the people, these are the end users and the owners of the economy. So how to communicate with them safely, how to, give the preparation, giving the heads up. These are the challenges, right? Creating that bridge is a challenge. But at the same time, you have to be fully in compliance with OFAC and US Treasury. So that's why if you see the website, you see that all the disclosures are there, the technology transfer, the knowledge, the money, etc. Everything has to be fully black and white in compliance with OFAC and US Treasury, because we do not want to defeat the purpose either. So these are the challenges. But at the same time, it's a great opportunity because we are creating our destiny and we are bringing peace and prosperity and dignity to Iran, with the support of Iranians, to the region and to the world.
Bardia, thank you for sharing. I think it is a vision that is important to hear. It is one that is needed in this moment, which is very dark in terms of the little bit that we get. So thank you for sharing this. Thank you for doing the work that you do. And I hope that day zero comes soon and that there is going to still be challenges ahead, but that there are people like you and others ready to make Iran the incredible place that it was in the past and that it hopefully will be in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hunter. Thank you to you and to your platform for being the voice for the voiceless and for echoing the truth when it is very inconvenient, and for holding global political leaders accountable for how they choose to respond. Thank you.